All right, let's go. What up, y'all? Tonight we're covering All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. And this is going to be a deep dive into one of the seminal works of prose from the 20th century, the German writer Eric Maria Remarque. And this is his 1928-1929 novel about the Great War, about World War I. So this should be a good one. This is going to be a good deep dive into this really monumental work. And it's hard to express um, my impressions rereading the work. Start off by saying that I don't often. I'm not on here to say, oh, go out, and you should read these books. And I'm here to talk about the books that I read and to analyze them and for a high IQ audience and to talk about form, content, meaning, to talk about a worldview, something expressed in works of art. We've done plenty of work so far. We've gone through a wide range of literature and to talk about the meaning of art and literature. And I don't think I've ever done this before. But what I'll say is that I think I really do think that everyone should read this book. If you haven't read this book before, and I say that because, I first read this book when I was in sixth grade. I've read it a couple times since then, but I reread it today, and it's I don't know, it's about a 300-page book. You can barrel through it in about a day. I mean, I read it this afternoon, and I will say that I haven't said that really about any of the works that we've done so far. I think everybody should read, of course, and I think that there, there's a lot to be said. But I think that this book is so powerful. It really hit me this time, you guys. And I think that uh, one of the reasons for that is because this is, it's a 1929 book. I'll talk in a minute about the history of the book and about the author, and I'll give a sort of a breakdown of the plot, etc. But I think that usually, the fellas, a lot of us have read this book probably in middle school, high school. Maybe you read it in grad school. Maybe you're doing it for your doctoral work, what have you. But I would say that that this book is incredibly powerful. And one of the things that really struck me about it this time was that my impression of the book. A lot of the works that we've covered. One of the reasons that I'm covering them is because, as I've said from the very beginning, um, you know, we'll hear mention or we'll hear reference, we'll hear allusions to various literary works. We'll hear quotes from things in the pop, in culture, in the zeitgeist, or whatever, in media. But oftentimes they are either out of context or the original meaning is lost or a number of reasons. And that's why we've sort of gone back and, we've looked at the text. And this book is so ingrained in the Western mind that it's hard to really gauge how powerful it is in its original, it's in its original text. Of course, it's a translation because it's a German work, but in its original text. And I was really moved. I'm not trying to get all emo here, right? But I'm just saying, I was really moved by this book, incredibly moved. It's so powerful, and we're going to discuss the themes of the work. We're going to discuss what it means in light of World War One and the Great War. But really, it applies. Of course, we're talking about it because literature lives, right? Literature lives. The great literature in the canon of literature remains relevant always. And this book, especially, I found to be incredibly relevant to today, right now. It's relevant right now. There is stuff going on in the world right now and in our own lives. I had conversations yesterday with people prior to rereading this book, and I reread the book, and I thought, if only today, I thought, if only they could reread the book, right? If they could reread this book. And so, I think that I would recommend that really everybody, everybody's got, their own lives and stuff going on. But if you're looking for a great book to read, this isn't book club. I know that. But I would really highly recommend this book. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, it's really, really moving. So let's dive into it. So again, just for everybody who's just now getting here, thanks everybody. Appreciate y'all being here on a weeknight. Is this a weeknight? What day is this? um, and thank you to everybody who's been here in the streams. I know we're really kind of powering through a lot of content recently. Thanks to everybody who's sharing clips. Thanks to Kristen, Slowboy Whiteboard out there. Thanks to all my homies. Thanks to everybody for sharing this. Thanks to everybody who's recently subscribed. You have no idea how much I mean, I can't believe that we have like 675 subs now. I mean, that's incredible to me. Who would have thought that, so many of y'all would be gracious enough to come and spend a couple hours and analyze literature and talk about the important stuff with me. So I really appreciate you all. Thanks to all my mods and homies out there. Thanks to the Green Feathers and Emily. I was just enjoying you guys painting over there. If you guys want to go to the Green Feathers and sub to his channel, check out their awesome artwork. Green Feathers, of course, is a long-time verified alpha eSeleb Chad on YouTube. He's got, if you guys didn't know, he's got like 100K plus views. He's long time, and he's a big time supporter and homie. So we of course appreciate you and Jerry and Mixky and Jethro and Crispy and Jason, everybody out there. Also, shouts out to let's see, Schultz Deals, who donated $10 to me earlier today. Really appreciate you. If you want to donate and support me, support the channel, help me to buy books, help me to get stuff going, then yeah, look at the links in the chat and in the video description, the channel description, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. You can support me at any time, and I really appreciate it. And before I get going, you guys, we got some good stuff coming up for next week. I'm really excited. I was talking to my homeboy. If you guys have been with the channel, if you've been here and you've seen the discussion that I had with Westlex Media, Sole Purpose from ACR, Alternate Current Radio, our homeboy over there. We're going to be doing a based analysis of a film next week. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it because he's a true homie. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So we got a lot of stuff lined up, and we got stuff coming for the future. So it's going to be cool. Yeah. Shouts out to the Iceman out there, Jerry, right? Keeping us all cool, slinging that ice out there, actual ice, just to reiterate, like selling it to stores, like to put in drinks. That's what I'm talking about. So yeah, shouts out to our homie Jerry out there. All right. So let's dive in, you guys. We are covering All Quiet on the Western Front. Again, many people will recognize this book because they probably will have read it like, in middle school. It's written in the style of the prose is fairly simplistic, purposefully so, because the speaker, Paul, and the characters are young. I mean, they're not middle school age. Obviously, they're old enough to go to war, but they're about 18 to 20 years old. And there is an older character named Kaczynski, or Kat, that plays one of the central roles. He's a very likable character. But the rest of them are, youth. And one of the themes in the novel, of course, is going to be the split, the dichotomy between youth and old age, which there's an abyss between the two. And he really points that out. And it means more than just the usual generational gap. Okay. War is the crucible of human existence where things come out into the extreme, right? In extremis death, and extremis means death. And the book is, even though it's about war and death and heartache, it's not a dark book. It's actually one of the purposes of the book is that it's also not an adventure book, because and I'll say about that you would also assume, any other book than this would be didactic, meaning that, you feel like you're being taught, right? You feel like you're being moralized to. And like I said at the beginning of this channel, that's one of the things that I didn't want for this channel from the very, very beginning, that I didn't want to, I didn't want anybody, I want us to be, we're on the level here. And and we're discussing, adult themes and high IQ stuff that applies to us um, on a daily basis and that is important. This stuff is important. We're not just, you know, discussing like light literature for the sake of a book club. We're doing this because this is a worldview. Like I've said, many times, and all of our friends have said that, in the world now that politics isn't going to save you. These sort of trite things aren't going to save you. Um, only God is going to save us. And there is a lack of the mention of God and religion within the book, and I think that's purposeful because like I said that all art, in my opinion, all art is about two things. All art and literature is about two things, right? One is our relationship with God, right? Why are we here and what are we doing, right? What's our purpose? And two is our relationship with each other, right? And, what does it mean to be a human being? And I think that one of the things that comes out of this book is that the characters over time become, I don't want to say jaded, but they become tempered by the reality and the fact of war, and it leaves a huge hole in their hearts and in their existence, just like the hole that's left in the center of Europe with the Great War. And one of the major things to come out of it is what is our relationship with each other. And Paul will say, the speaker, the protagonist in this book will say, um, I should get to this, but I'll just say what he says is basically that, if only the people who are in charge of making these wars, if only the people who signed the treaties and the deeds and sign the checks and make the plans could be confronted by the realities of youth and by the people fighting the war and by the people that it really affects, maybe the world would be a different place. Now that we can apply that to sort of any situation that we're in now, right? But war is what it mainly applies to, and that also may sound like a cliche statement, right? I mean, it's almost cliche now. But the fact is that all of the war literature, not all the war literature, but all of the war novels specifically, all of the 20th century novels about war, and especially all of the films and all of the movies that, especially the ones that purport to be anti-war, they all have their origin in this book. This is the start. Now, it's not the start of war literature. War literature goes back, is as old as time, right? Um, but this book is especially significant because think of any war movie, okay? And it can be something that applies to the Great War. It can be The Paths of Glory, right, by Stanley Kubrick. It can be the All Quiet on the Western Front from, All Quiet on the Western Front was made into a movie in 1930, I think, right after the book was published, and it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Even back then, it's 90, almost 100 years ago. And but you think of modern war movies, or at least recent war movies. Think of like Saving Private Ryan or Jarhead or any of these movies. They all directly, I mean, especially Jarhead, because Anthony Swafford, the main character in that book, is a writer, right? And a lot of what he says is just a mimicking or an echo of this. Now, that's okay. He's not copying the book, and what he's doing here is he's expressing the more contemporary attitude that comes out of his experience in the war, which is sort of universal. At least this book will make it seem so. Is universal to all people, all war fighters, all warriors. I've got another book up there, The Yellowbirds. The Yellowbirds is an award-winning book. It's about the Iraq War. It's written by a guy from Virginia, and again, it's about this. It's one of the constant themes that comes out of war, which is the difference between being in the war and what it means to come back. Now, we think of things like, PTSD and all that stuff. We think of those things as sort of contemporary reactions to war, and as like sort of almost a ultra modern or a post modern or a postmodern symptom of the war on terror. But we know that goes back to, shell shock. But, consider what shell shock really is. And this book really shows you what shell shock is. Shell shock is in this book is essentially these kids are sitting in a trench, um, and they are infected with they're overwhelmed with sensory imagery. They're assaulted, they're blitzed with sensory imagery, right? They're overloaded. The sounds, the smell. At one point they talk about that all they can smell is chloroform and putrefaction, right? They all they see is the corpse rats. They get trench foot, they get trench mouth. They're drowning in a sea of the vapor of mustard gas, and then when it rains, the trenches fill up, and it's this mud pit full of death and bones and body parts. There's not enough room to bury. There's nowhere to bury their comrades. And there's all this stuff, and then they're on top of that, they're being barraged. There's an artillery barrage that can last, like at the Somme. The artillery barrage lasted for like 7 days and 7 nights, and it's not just an artillery barrage; it is ear-splitting, soul-crushing destruction. And so, what he says basically is that like there are parts in the book where he's on the front, he's in the front, he's on the actual front line. It's an actual line when they talk about the front lines of the war. This is literally a front line. It's a line dug. It's a trench dug in a muddy field. And all they do in the book is fight for like 100 yards back and forth. It's the most pointless thing. And they're on the front line, and he'll go back home or he'll go on leave. And what happens is like, he goes on leave and he sees his family, and he says that the women know better than to ask him about like what life was like on the front. They don't want to make him talk about it. And the men, especially the older men, will give him these like lectures about, oh, what we need to do is, we need to take the British, and, we need to, maneuver around this spot. And his kind of thought process is like, you have no idea what the war is like. I was there, right? I am there. I have to go back there in a couple of days. And then if he says something like that, the older guys are like, yeah, but you only see like your direct locus. You only see like your immediate surroundings. You don't have a bigger picture. It's like, well, they don't have a bigger picture either, right? Now, that doesn't mean people can't talk about it, and people can't, sort of, backroom strategize or whatever. But the point is, he even says that like the people that talk to him about the war or try to talk to him about it he has nothing to say to them, because they can't possibly understand. They can't possibly be on his level. There's even the thought of thinking about that is beyond comprehension. There's just no way they could possibly relate. But he also feels a kind of contempt for the people who don't bring it up, because he sees a slight sense of satisfaction in their eye. Like, oh, I'm a good person for not bringing it up. So it's this weird, like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And he kind of realizes that like, no matter what happens after the war, all he wants to do for the rest of his life is to try to make a difference and fight so that nobody else will ever have to deal with this. Now, that obviously does not come into fruition. So let me talk about just the basic plot of the book before I go into any deeper analysis into the themes. All Quiet on the Western Front is a book by Maria Remarque, and that was not his middle name. He changed his middle name later to Maria to honor his mother who had passed away. And one thing that's interesting is that the writer, he lived. I sometimes confuse Remarque with Wilfred Owen, because Wilfred Owen, wrote Dulce et decorum est, right? Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. We've covered that. One of our first streams, we covered the World War I poem by Wilfred Owen. And I sometimes confuse the two, because Owen actually did die in the war. He wrote the poem and then he died in the war, right? Now, Remarque did not die. He did fight in World War I. And a lot of his experiences are factual experiences. Of course, it doesn't really matter, because we're talking about a character in the book. And we're going to, as we always do, we're going to separate the author from the speaker in the book. These are two separate characters. But Remarque, he published the book in 1928 or 29. It immediately was translated. It was first published in a newspaper, and then it was put into book form. It was immediately translated into like 15 languages. It was a huge success. It was a wild success. It sold like 15 million copies its first year of publication. And then, of course, the film rights were bought, and then it won an Academy Award. But one of the results of this is what do you think was happening around that time? Right, this is between World War I and World War II. It's published in about 28 or 29. In 1933, of course, is when a certain group of people took power in Germany. And this book was one of the first books put on the list of degenerate artworks, and it was burned. It was book burned. And one can see from their viewpoint why, looking back, at least in hindsight, why they would do that. They said basically it was an anti-war book. It demeaned the spirit of, German nationalism. And there's a particular segment in the book where it talks about the medical establishment and how they mistreat their patients who are warriors, and so they didn't want that getting out, and they burned it. But then they tried to character assassinate him, and they said that he was actually a member of a specific group, and they said that his last name was actually he had changed his last name, and his name was spelled Remark, which was he had changed it from backwards, and it was Kramer, right? Kramer. So that was a way they tried to use to assassinate him, character assassinate him in order to put him in camps. He ended up he fled to Switzerland with his wife, and then they were became naturalized citizens and came to the United States. They lived in the United States for many years, and then later on, way on down the line, they moved back and they lived in Switzerland. I think he died in Locarno in Switzerland. I've been to Lugano in the Swiss Riviera. The Swiss Riviera is amazing, you guys. But he died in Switzerland, and then his wife donated like $20 million to maybe NYU to build a specific literary center. Anyway, but the point is that when that happened, all of his family was safe except for his sister. His sister was still back in Germany. The Gestapo caught up with his sister. And basically, I think his words were, they couldn't get to him, so they were going to use her. And they decapitated her. They cut off her head. And later on, I think he made he did one interview where he said that his sister was involved in resistance activities. So, they caught her. But the point is that, he lived a long life, but he did suffer for his work. This isn't the only great work that he's written. It's, of course, his major work. And, this is by far, people will try to claim, people over the years have tried to debunk, his own, the accounts in the novel, forgetting, I guess, that it's a novel, right? And they'll say, no, I was with him in the actual hospital, and that's not how they treated us, etc. It doesn't matter, right? This is the truth of it is in the book. And it's a truth that is the way that the soldiers are treated in the hospital by these sort of, doctors who he criticizes as, gone mad and using people essentially for their own, disgusting human experimentation. And he criticizes that a long time ago in this, but this is like almost 100 years ago. He was dialed into this. And what's beyond question essentially is the fact that, is that the truths that come out of the book and his stance on war is unparalleled. One more thing before I get into the plot. One that comes out of any discussion of war literature or war film, right, is always what the media is quick to say. The media is always quick to say. They're always quick to deem a book. They're going to say, this is an anti-war movie, right? When Saving Private Ryan came out, right, they said, this is the greatest anti-war movie of all time. And I don't know about you guys, but, that was like 1997, 1998. And of course I bought that, right? I bought what they said. I thought, this is an anti-war movie. You go along with that. It wasn't until much later that I realized that Saving Private Ryan, just a little tangent here, but Saving Private Ryan is not an anti-war film. It's a pro-war film, right? It's a pro-war film under the guise of an anti-war film. Cheers, y'all. Of an anti-war film, Because if you notice in Saving Private Ryan, this is not a, it's kind of a hot take, and it's not my own. Actually, I got this maybe from Rob Ager. Um, One of the things you notice in Saving Private Ryan is that the allies, of course, are humanized, right? We get their stories, we get their backstories, which, by the way, the relationship between Tom Hanks and the other guys, Matt Damon and the other Matt Damon and the other guys in the film, right, is lifted pretty much straight from this book, right? They've got this older, wiser character who's there, and he's got a life back home, and he's kind of teaching these guys in the ways of the world and the war, the younger guys, straight from All Quiet on the Western Front. But what you notice about that movie is that who is not humanized? It would be the enemy. If it were a true anti-war film, right, it would humanize all sides of the conflict to show that these are human beings fighting other human beings, and they would show the futility of war and the disgusting nature of especially a global conflict at the behest of these, special interests that we know. And it doesn't do that. It sort of mutinizes the enemy. They all look the same. They all look exactly the same. They have no names, and they're all sort of mowed down. Even when the guy commits the killing at the end of the movie, the audience cheers, right? Because those are the bad guys. But and that may be the case. All I'm saying is the point is you can't make a pro-war film under the guise of an anti-war film and not have people question it. And that is one of the points of this book, is that there's a scene in the book where he is in a face-to-face confrontation with the enemy. It's a Frenchman, and this is the absolute pinnacle of warfare, right? The rest of it is combat across no man's land, or shooting at each other or whatever. And sometimes sometimes they get close enough to bayonet each other, which you would think would be the closest, hand-to-hand combat. But the scene in the book is absolute primordial, instinctual, hand-to-hand combat. And he realizes that, that he's wrong. And he's not wrong because of the situation. He's wrong because of the events leading to the situation and in which he's been thrown. And he sees himself as, as he can't believe that this has happened to him. So let's talk about All Quiet on the Western Front and what happens in the book. The book begins essentially with it's sort of non-chronological, but it begins with a group of recruits, young guys about 18 years old, who are coming straight out of school. They've been sort of coerced to sign up to do their duty for their country and sign up for the Kaiser, to go to the front. And this schoolmaster has sort of coerced them. There's a scene later where he will confront that schoolmaster. But they begin their training. They go through their basic training, and he talks about how the sort of stupidity of the drill, but also how drill functions, is useful. Because if there's one thing that we all now looking back can recognize, you guys, all of us, because we're all grown ass people, what we can all recognize is that, and I think probably a lot of people don't really realize this, is that when you are a kid, right? And when you think back about being a kid, the things that you remember best about being a kid are twofold and sort of at odds with each other. One is the freedom, right? The absolute innocent freedom, to explore the world and to do what you want, at least back then, right? To go on, to wake up on a Saturday morning, and to go out on bike rides with your friends, or to go to the pool all day in the summer, to stay gone all day, right? And that's like youth, yes. But the other thing that we look fondly on is the things that we don't realize till later that are structured, right? We love and we miss, without even knowing it, the structure and the rigidity that is provided for us by adults. In other words, we all know that, like, when you're with a group of friends or a group of group of people, and that you go through the bad things in life, it sucks when you're going through them, but it creates a bond, right? Where later on you can laugh about it, about certain things, right? Because you all went through it together. One example would be school, right? I mean, think about, I can remember right now being like 14 years old and thinking I have to go to school every day, all day, for a minimum, the next 4 years, right? I ended up going to school for the next, I don't know, however many years, all the way through grad school, right? And it sucks being in like math class every day, and you got to sit in there for like 45 minutes or however long your class is, and that sucks. But you realize that, looking back, what you realize is that the the rigid nature, the rules, actually, they are good. They make you into an adult. They make you into a human being. And if you have no rules, it's chaos. And we all lived under this system of rules where essentially the rules provide for everything that's provided for us, right? And a lot of times as adults, I don't know how you feel, but I know a lot of adults feel like, probably like, yeah, they want freedom, but of course they need rules and structure. We all need rules and structure. We need routine. We need a routine to sort of establish the continuity of life, to establish a rhythm, to get through the day sometimes. And we sometimes miss that there are people that when we were younger did that for us. And that's what uh, Paul's youth is accelerated to the point where he grows up like in a matter of weeks. And he doesn't just grow up from a child to an adult. He grows up in a hyper forward way where he is more grown up than all the other adults because of what he's put through. But one thing that he realizes is that, yeah, the drill and all that stuff is seems stupid, and you can make jokes about it and it's ridiculous, but it also provides them with the training necessary to go to the front and to be able to survive. Now, of course, what happens is then they get sent to the front, and they immediately meet this guy named Kaczynski, or Cat. They call him Cat, Kat. And it's funny because in one of the films of All Quiet on the Western Front, Cat is played by Ernest Borgnine, 33rd degree Ernest Borgnine, by the way, who is like 30 or 40 years too old for the role. But in the book, he's described as a 40-year-old. They're all like 18 years old. He's 40. And Cat has this, he's like an adept at war. He has a second sight. He teaches them, basically, when they first get there, he teaches them to differentiate between the sounds of, like, for instance, mortars and bombs, and the short bombs and the long bombs, and to know that the short bombs are more dangerous. The whistling that they hear, they know how to duck, where to go. And this is proven to them right away because they're walking along and they duck, and one of the guys who doesn't, or who goes the wrong way that he was told not to go, in the direction he was told not to, gets annihilated by a bomb. And this is constantly proven throughout the book, throughout the narrative. Cat also has a sixth sense for where to find food. He's a scavenger in he knows, like, in a 15-mile radius where there's a goose, or where there's a pig, or where there's something to eat besides the normal slop that they eat. They're always eating like horse meat and stuff. And they also learn just basically the Cat teaches them all of the practical things about war that one can only gain by experience, or with, a master, an adept teacher like Cat, who, one of the other things that separates them from him is that he says basically that, they are thrown into war, and they've had their youth, but they haven't really lived, and they go straight into war. Whereas all the older guys like Cat have a life to get back to. They have wives, they have children, and they think of their service as simply, I've seen this before. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm going to do this. It's my job right now. And then I'm going to go back, which is just like Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan. Remember, he talks about, his wife and kids, and he's actually a teacher in that movie. The book begins with a sort of a frontispiece, a statement here. And it's written by Remarque, and it says, "This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. I will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by war." This is where the lost generation came into existence. He, with all the poems and all the work and all the artwork and all the discussion about the lost generation, nobody encapsulates it like this guy. He gets it better than anybody. And one of the other functions of this right away is he's basically saying, he's saying, look, this is not a political work. It's not a pro-war work. It's not an anti-war work. It's just a statement of what happened, right? Then we go straight into the novel, sort of in media res. We are at rest, 5 miles behind the front. So they've already been at the front. I'm going to skip to page 12 here in this book, because it's the first chapter of the book is so gripping. I mean, it really grips you right away, and it's sort of a microcosm of the rest of the book, because everything that's contained in the rest of the book is sort of stated beforehand in the first chapter. But I'm going to skip to page 12 here, because this is where he talks about the dichotomy within the generation gap. He says, for us lads of 18, they ought to have been mediators and guides to the world of maturity, the world of work, of duty, of culture, of progress, to the future. We often made fun of them and played jokes on them, but in our hearts, we trusted them. He's talking about the older people. The idea of authority, which they represented, was associated in our minds with a greater insight and a more humane wisdom. But the first death we saw shattered this belief. We had to recognize that our generation was more to be trusted than theirs. They surpassed us only in phrases and in cleverness. The first bombardment showed us our mistake, and under it, the world, as they had taught it to us, broke in pieces. While they continued to write and talk, we saw the wounded and dying. While they taught that duty to one's country is the greatest thing, we already knew that death throes are stronger. But for all that, we are no mutineers, no deserters, no cowards. They were very free with all these expressions. We loved our country as much as they. We went courageously into every action. And also we distinguished the false from true. We had suddenly learned to see, and we saw that there was nothing of their world left. We were all at once terribly alone, and alone we must see it through. Hell yes, dude. Right? Tell his ass. I mean, this applies to today. Now, I'm not criticizing. I and he are. We're not criticizing the older generation. This isn't a question of like, oh, the old people don't understand. What he's talking about here is essentially it's a rite of passage for one, but it's also, every generation goes through this where the old, for example, if you want to talk about like politics, right? If you want to talk about just the, not based, but base level politics, you think like, what have those people ever done for us, right? What have they ever done for you? What have they ever done for anyone? Not that you're expecting them to. I'm not talking about handouts, but I'm talking about the people that supposedly represent you are all so far removed in every way, even in age, that there is no possible way that you can relate to him, right? No, let's get to the, yeah, you're right, Jerry. Thank you so much, homeboy. Let's check we got some super chats here. So let's check that before I keep going. Thank you, Devin. Devin sends $5, says, thanks for the channel, brother. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Yo, listen, I really appreciate it. I mean, I know I say this every time, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate, $5, $1, right? Anything that everybody out there is hardworking, and it's hard to make a buck. We all know it's much easier to spend it than to make it. And I really appreciate you taking the time and energy to even clicking on the link. I understand that. Everybody understands that. Clicking on the link and sending a couple bucks can be a real pain in the ass, and there can be a little cognitive click there that says, nah, not this time. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Thank you so much. Kristen sends $5. Kristen, keep killing it, homie. Kristen, you are my homie, and I love you so much. I always will. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I especially really appreciate it. I really loved that video this morning with the DARPA dogs and Giddy Gill dancing, and Klowski and his Vulcan Temple of Set, robe or whatever the hell he's wearing, but I appreciated that video. Thank you so much. Let's see. Yo, my homeboy, the Iceman, the Kang, Jerry the Iceman sends $10. Thank you so much, Jerry. Appreciate you always. You are one of my best friends. You are wise. I love you so much. And thank you, buddy. I really appreciate you. Everybody out there, especially if you're watching this later, please go to Exposing Powerful Lies live streams, Exposing Powerful Lies, semicolon, live streams. Okay, that's our homeboy, Jerry. And he has a based channel. And we love you, homeboy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. So thank you so much, guys. Thanks for those donations. Let's keep going here. Let's keep rolling. Let's see. One of their friends on page 16, 17, one of their friends gets his leg blown off. And one of the interesting things is that he says he's observing him, and he essentially says he has this ability, even though he's been at the front for a very short time, he has the ability to decipher when a person is dying and when they're not, because there's a lot. The way he describes it, essentially, they get hit, they're lying there, and you can sort of tell when your friend is going to make it because of the color that he has on him, like the amount of like life force. And basically it's like once he starts to turn, like there's a little yellow, and then he sees it in their eyes, he sees it in their face. We did a stream here about the skull beneath the skin, right? And John Webster and the Duchess of Malfi, but that is what he sees here. It's interesting also that T.S. Eliot, whose Wasteland is not his poem, The Wasteland, but the term the wasteland is mentioned in this because the wasteland is the no man's land between the two lines. But, the Wasteland is a World War I, lost generation poem. And what was I going to say? And he can, and in the Wasteland, Eliot cites, I don't know if he cites this book. No, he couldn't have, because he published it in 1925. But he definitely cites John Webster, and there are major correlations between the two works. And anyway, his friend groans, he's feverish. And what's interesting is he says to his friend, listen, man, you're going to be all right. They got great doctors now. They got the best technology in false limbs. We're going to get you a new leg, and you're going to be all right. And it's like, dude, this is like supposed to take place in like this part of the book is like 1916 and the best in technology, right? It's like, no, you got like the town, barber out there who's now in the hospital cutting off this dude's leg. At least they give him some morphine. He called it morphia. He gives him some morphia. And then the guy essentially, he slips away, and he says, he sort of reminisces, and he says, one of their friends goes outside, and he says, damn shit, the damn shit. That's all he can say. And he says, we walked for a long time. Crop has calmed himself. We understand. He saw red. Out there, every man gets like that sometimes. He laughs. We are the iron youth. That's the way they think. These 100,000 Cantorex, iron youth. We are none of us more than 20 years old, but young youth, that is long ago. We are old folk. And that's one of the major themes in the book, right? Is that they're sort of the walking dead, or the old. They are old. They've seen everything that life can throw at them in its worst way in a very short amount of time. He says, on page 19, one of the things that I thought was interesting is he says, it's strange to think that at home in the drawer of my writing table, there lies the beginning of a play called Saul and a bundle of poems. Many an evening I've worked over them. We all did something of the kind, but that has become so unreal to me, I cannot comprehend it anymore. Our early life is cut off from the moment we came here, and that without our lifting a hand. And what I saw there was obviously we get the religious significance of Saul, but it's not until, this is page 19, it's not until page 227 that I came across the other side of that. If there's a Saul, there's going to be a Paul. And his name, remember the name of the character is Paul, but he says on page 227, he says, the front remains quiet. I breathe deeply and talk to myself in my excitement. No foolishness now, Paul. Quiet, Paul, quiet. Then you will be saved, Paul. When I use my Christian name, it works as though someone else spoke it to me. It has more power. Now, that's just a small excerpt in the book, but I found that particularly significant because it's the first time that I can recall in the rest of the book where he mentions his own name. He sort of dissociates, right? And he calls himself, it's as if he's talking to himself. But this is obviously, it represents, it's allegorical for the fact that at the beginning he is he's a zealot, right? He's a zealot for patriotism and for war, but he is unexperienced, he's inexperienced, and he's untempered by the realities of it. But on his sort of road to Damascus, which is, across the trenches, across no man's land, he is hit by the symbolism of the bright lights of the arc light of the arc light is like the other side that the Tommies, the British will shoot up essentially a balloon with lights on it, and that will illuminate the wasteland, their targets, and then they can drop mortars or bombs or aim their artillery fire at them. But in the midst of that sort of illumination, he realizes the experience that he's gone through, and he has not a spiritual, it's certainly not a religious conversion, right? But it is allegorically speaking, it is a spiritual conversion into sort of the opposite direction, where it's like he realizes that he's been thrown into this, and that humanity is at its worst, right? Humanity is at its worst in this situation. I mean, when could it be worse, right? When they are actually at each other's throats. And he realizes that if he gets out, he wants to do something. He's gonna live his life. He's gonna like make some sort of change, so nobody else, nobody will ever forget this. Going back to chapter 2, let's see. The order and the rigidity of structure and drill. One thing I wrote on page 23 was, we hear these stories of the military, but it's important to keep in mind where they came from. Okay, so this is he says, I've remade. Let's see. They are in. Yes, Kristen says, yeah, Kristen. I think I agree with you there. So they're in basic training, and he says, basically the guy, this is like this thing we hear about war, you may be watching this, have gone through basic, and I know this is true from the French Foreign Legion does this especially, which is basically, you're in training, and your NCO or whoever they'll make you remake your bed like a million times, and they'll throw all your stuff out the window. It's never good enough. It's never good enough. It's never good enough. He says, I remade this bed 14 times in one morning. Each time he had some fault to find and pulled it to pieces. I've needed a pair of prehistoric boots that were as hard as iron for 20 hours with intervals, of course. Crop and I were given the job of clearing the barrack rack of snow with a hand broom and a dustpan. We would have gone on until we were frozen had not a lieutenant accidentally appeared who sent us off and hauled Himmelstoss over the coals. Himmelstoss, Crispy brought this up earlier. Himmelstoss is this short little shitty little fucking dude who is in charge of them, and who treats them like shit because he's got, Napoleonic syndrome or whatever. I don't even want to call it that because Napoleon was somebody. This guy's a nobody. And eventually they end up, they're carrying a latrine bucket, and they get stopped. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? And they accidentally dump the latrine bucket on him. And then they end up later beating him up. And it says on page 26, and that guy also turns out to be both he's a coward because he's hiding in one of the foxholes during the shelling, but then later he makes a charge to the front, so he kind of forgives him. But it says, but we have felt ridiculous had we hauled down our colors. We became hard, suspicious, pitiless, vicious, tough, and that was good, for these attributes were just what we lacked. That's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about rigidity, right, and structure and rules. That young people crave rules. They crave structure. We all did. We don't really realize that we did, and we don't really think back and think about that sort of thing, but we did. Had we gone into the trenches without this period of training, most of us would certainly have gone mad. Only thus were we prepared for what awaited. We did not break down, but adapted ourselves over 20 years, which made many another thing so grievous, helped us in this. But by far the most important result was that it awakened us in us a strong, practical sense of esprit de corps. which in the field developed into the finest thing that arose out of the war, comradeship. Now, we often hear this about war and about the military. And I know that it's hard for, civilians, for, myself, like as a civilian, to understand this sort of comradeship, right? This, like we said in Henry V, this band of brothers, right? But that is I would say that if I were to take one central meaning from this book, right? And remember, it's not didactic. He's not teaching us. He's not trying to teach us any moral lessons. But any good recommendations for a 0-year-old? Yes. Mozart and Shakespeare. Yes. People that have 0-year-olds should be playing Mozart in the womb, right? Because it will increase their intelligence. Okay. Yes. How about this? Read. You should be reading the entire Bible, the Gospel, the Old Testament, reading the Psalms, Shakespeare, maybe Paradise Lost. I don't know. And Mozart to a 0-year-old. Shouts out to my sis. All right. So, that the meaning, the main meaning I would take from this would be the esprit de corps, the comradeship. That is the meaning that he takes. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters to him in this book and in the life of Paul within the book. Nothing matters more than friendship, than his friends, because no one else can understand, and they give him life. They save his life. They literally save his life, right? But they give him life. They reaffirm his sense of what it means to know what life is. Let's see. Let's skip to pages 32 and 33. I thought I would read page 33 here because 33, eliminate, confirm. Read page 33 because here is a great example of where we can talk about the style, the form, and the content of the book and how it produces meaning. This is the end of the chapter. He says, outside of the door, I'm aware of the darkness and the wind as a deliverance. I breathe as deep as I can and feel the breeze in my face, warm and soft as never before. Thoughts of girls, of flowery meadows, of white clouds suddenly come into my head. My feet begin to move forward in my boots. I go quicker. I run. Soldiers pass by me. I hear their voices without understanding. The earth is streaming with forces which pour into me through the soles of my feet. The night crackles electrically. The front thunders like a concert of drums. My limbs move supplely. I feel my joints strong. I breathe the air deeply. The night lives. I live. I feel a hunger greater than comes from the belly alone. Mueller stands in front of the hut waiting for me. I give him the boots. We go in. He tries them on. They fit well. He roots among his supplies and offers me a fine piece of saveloy. With it goes hot tea and rum. Now, this passage is important because, number one, he's speaking in short, terse, active verb, simple sentences in the present tense. In other words, we, the reader, are there with him in the moment, going through the motions. And the motions are important here because the context of this passage is that his best friend has just died. And he in that sign of the difference between youth and adulthood, you realize that, especially in his situation, you cannot mope, right? His grieving has to be done actively. He has to take his grieving and make it hard. He has to use that as momentum for the fight that he's in, right? In this literal war. And adulthood, I don't know, who knows about, these aren't lessons about adulthood, but I do know that the people that we or I certainly tend to look up to are, I'm not saying the people that don't grieve, right? Those people are sociopaths. I'm saying that, and grieving is a natural and a necessary part of, death and life. But the people that realize that, no matter what, man, you got to keep on living. LIVIN. You got to keep on living. And you got to put one foot in front of the other when the bad things happen. You have to put one foot in front of the other. You have to do practical things. You have to walk outside, light your cigarette. You have to go get something to eat. You have to have a place to stay that night. You have to take a shower. You have to talk to your friends. You have to go get a drink. You have to, get up the next morning. You got to read you got to do the little things, right? And for him, one of those things that's necessary in his situation is the boots. His friend has died, and his friend willed his most prized possession in wartime, which would be his boots. He willed his boots to him. He's going to take the boots. He's going to go give them to his friend. I found that particularly inspiring. I'm going to skip here to page 52 because he talks about the imagery of fear. What happens here is that what happens is that Paul makes his way basically through the war, and they're on the front lines. And the way that the book is structured is like there's a difference between we have like on off. It's kind of like comic relief in Shakespeare. It's like you can't have too much of murder and mayhem and blood and guts and destruction and tragedy, even in a play like Macbeth. Remember in Macbeth, after they've killed Duncan, we get that whole scene with the porter, and the porter gives us his bawdy humor, and that's because it allows the audience to reset their emotions. It allows us to sort of pull back and then to dive back in at the necessary point. And that's what happens in the book, and it reflects real life because they'll be at the front and he'll witness the most awful, horrible things that human beings can do to each other. But then they get a reprieve. Then they go and there's time in the bunker. There's time. They get time away from the front. Then he gets some time on leave. And it's in those moments really that are that's really the power of the book. The power of the book is not, just the war and the fighting and the destruction. The power of the book is that, is in the rest and the reprieve and the comradeship and the friendship, because he says, no matter what, they'll be relaxing in a field, in a meadow full of flowers, but they'll always have on their mind that they're going to have to go back to the front, but they're not far enough away where it's going to ruin their drive. And also they're not thinking about it consciously because they can't. It's almost bad luck to do that. Right. The simple sentences also are reflective of not only his youth, right, and his simple mindset of thinking one thing after the other. It also reflects the practical nature of what he has to do. We don't have long, rambling, compound, complex sentences, right? There's a great variety of sentence structure in this book because it reflects the age. It reflects the mindset determined by the experience and by the situation. It's the same with his sentence structure, with his syntax, the same with his simplistic, purposefully simplistic dialogue. The book is extremely well crafted. So on page 52 and 53, he says, the lorries arrive at the artillery lines. The gun emplacements are camouflaged with bushes against aerial observation and look like a kind of military feast of the tabernacles. Again, we get this religious significance to the ritual or the rite of passage of war. He says these branches might seem cheerful, but we're not cannon embowered there. In other words, they're setting up artillery positions and gun positions under bowers of the trees, and it would seem pleasant if they knew that there weren't instruments of death there. The air becomes acrid with the smoke of guns and fog. The fumes of powder taste bitter on the tongue. The roar of the guns makes our lorry stagger. The reverberation rolls, raging away to the rear. Everything quakes. Our faces change imperceptibly. We are not indeed in the front line, but only in the reserves, yet in every face can be read, this is the front. Now we are within its embrace. The next paragraph says, it is not fear. Men who have been up as often as we have become thick-skinned. Only the young recruits are agitated. Cat explains to them, that was a 12-inch. You can tell by the report. Now you'll hear the burst. But the muffled thud of the burst does not reach us. It is swallowed up in the general murmur of the front. Cat listens. There will be a bombardment tonight. We all listen. The front is restless. The Tommies are firing already, said Crop. There'll be a bombardment, I tell you. I can feel it in my bones. Cat shrugs. Again, Cat is an adept at war. Everything he says is to be listened to. When he says there will be a bombardment, there will be a bombardment. Says on page 54, our faces are neither paler nor more flushed than usual. They are not more tense nor more flabby, and yet they are changed. We feel that in our blood, a contact is shot home. That is no figure of speech. It is a fact. It is the front, the consciousness of the front that makes this contact. The moment that the first shells whistle over and the air is rent with the explosions, there is suddenly in our veins, in our hands, in our eyes, a tense waiting, a watching, a heightening alertness, a strange sharpening of the senses. The body with one bound is in full readiness. So do you see the sentence structure there and the diction? He changes to these, he gives us these ing verbs, these almost these gerunds, these continuous, like these. We have the language of motion. We have the language of constant motion, and that we're in something now, but we have to prepare for something in the future. And it's short sentences with terse language. He says on page 55, there's a dark meaning. There will be a bombardment. Perhaps it is our inner and most secret life that shivers and falls on guard. To me, the front is a mysterious whirlpool. Though I'm still in water far away from its center, I feel the whirl and the vortex sucking me slowly, irresistibly, inescapably into itself. From the earth, from the air, sustaining forces pour into us, mostly from the earth. To no man does the earth mean so much as the soldier. When he presses himself down upon her long and powerfully, when he buries his face and his limbs deep in her from the fear of death by shell fire, then she is his only friend, his brother, his mother. He stifles his terror and his cries in her silence and her security. She shelters him and releases him for 10 seconds to live, to run, 10 seconds of life, receives him again and often forever. Earth, 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 earth with dry folds, earth with thy folds and hollows and holes into which a man may fling himself and crouch down in the spasm of terror, under the hailing of annihilation, in the bellowing of death of the explosions. Oh, earth, thou grantest us the great resisting surge of new won life. So the language here becomes the archaic. It becomes almost biblical, right? It becomes the archaic, almost, AV authorized version, King James version of this sort of rhapsody of war, right? What he's doing here by changing the diction is he is showing us the profound importance of the little things that we never think of, and we as civilians never think to consider about war, right? Who would think that the earth would be so important in the psyche of the soldier, especially in World War I? I mean, consider that, World War I is there's an entire, there's the naval battles, but when we're talking about the land war and the land war in Europe, and we're talking about literally cutting into the earth, right? We're scarring the earth with these trenches, just like we're scarring the psyches of the minds of the public and of this entire generation and of we're still feeling the effects of this now, right? Even just as World War I was an effect of, was a result of, the Franco-Prussian War and the Napoleonic Wars and realpolitik. It's like this continuous roll. And he says that even right down to the earth, this reminds me of when we did Faustus, right? We did Christopher Marlowe, Dr. Faustus, when he says, when Faustus is doing his soliloquy and he's trying to speak to, first he tries to speak directly to Mephistopheles, then he tries to speak to God. And at first he says, earth, gape, right? He wants the earth to open up and swallow him. And that's what this guy's saying. He's saying he wants the earth to open up and swallow him and to hide him from the shelling, right? And that's true in a practical sense because of how they dig foxholes. And even when they don't dig themselves, they don't even need to, because the shelling creates these craters in the earth where they can hide. And so one of the themes of the book is the fact that the destruction in the book also serves as a life force, which is really weird. I hadn't considered that. I mean, I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit too. I'm just going to talk about it off the top of my head. I think one of the major scenes that impacted me so much was there's a scene where Paul and his, and the guys and the fellas are, they're walking to the front, and they end up walking past like this village, and they find themselves in a graveyard. And right when they're in the graveyard, they get shelled. So the howitzer and the artillery fire starts raining down upon them, and it ends up in this surreal hellscape. It ends up blowing the cemetery apart so that the bodies of the deceased are blown out of the earth, and they have to duck and find whatever cover they can. And he kind of gets knocked out for a second, and he looks up and he grabs a hand, but he realizes it's a dead man's hand, right? Remember that occurred in The Duchess of Malfoy. Remember the dead man's hand? But he grabs a dead man's hand, and he realizes it's a corpse. But that's the only recognition, because he's living this sort of death in life. And he realizes that his only shelter is a coffin. So he and another fella, they pour the dead guy out of the coffin. They throw him out of the coffin, and then they kind of cover themselves with this coffin. And that allows them protection from the shrapnel. I mean, it's unbelievable. He talks about how, even in death, the dead can give life, because that's the only way that they survived. It's really surreal. It's unbelievable. Never seen a scene like that before. He says, yeah, so, oh, Earth, at the bottom of that page 55, oh, Earth. Remember, whenever in Shakespearean language we get the single letter O, it's supposed to represent the yawning gulf, right? Which means it's as if the earth gapes open, and you can be swallowed whole in it, because the O in verse is is what we call expensive real estate, right? Here now we're in prose, but this reminds me of a sort of almost an Ahab soliloquy, right? We did Moby Dick, and it's almost like he's making these dark prophecies out into the ether, discussing the spiritual realities of the darkness of this war that they're in. Let's see. Page 56 talks about the second sight as a soldier. It says, and we, thy redeemed ones, bury ourselves in thee, and through the long minutes in a mute agony of hope, bite into thee with our lips. Imagine these guys like biting into the earth, right? He says, the mute agony, by the way, reminded me of the Jim Morrison Horse Latitudes. In mute nostril agony, carefully refined and sealed over, he says. I can't help but think that this is probably where Jim got the inspiration for that particular poem. I mean, he read this book, right? And his dad was an admiral. So he's reading war literature. But the reason I think that is not just because of that little phrase. It's also because the next scene is this horrible, the next scene in the novel is this horrible scene where they are subjected to the piercing death cries of horses who have been wounded in the shelling. And they can't pop their heads up to shoot the horses because it'll give away their location. But even when the shelling stops, like the horses are still screaming and crying, and then somebody ends up, putting them out of its misery. But this represents to me like it's like in that poem, right? And mute nostril agony, carefully refined and sealed over. Like the animalistic cries, the literal animalistic cries represent the shrieks from the souls of the humans. The human beings can never cry out and shriek as much as the animals do. And that is something that reflects their own horror. And even at the end of that scene, one of the characters kind of loses it a little. And he says, what have they ever done? What have the horses ever done? It's a sin that they had to put horses in this war. Right. And it's a sin. It's a sin that that the war is thrust upon them in the first place. Now, I'm not saying that war is I'm not, we all know that, time to love, a time to kill, right? There's a time for war, right there. Of course, there's a time for war. Um, but in terms of this war, right, in terms of so much of the war that we've seen, which is like to satisfy the demands of the globalists and the elite and the powers that be and the power structure. We all know that's what war, usually is, but especially this one. And he says, at the sound of the first droning of the shells, we rush back in one part of our being 1,000 years. By the animal instinct that is awakened in us, we are led and protected. It is not conscious. It is far quicker, much more sure, less fallible than consciousness. One cannot explain it. A man is walking along without thought or heed. Suddenly, he throws himself down on the ground, and a storm of fragments flies harmlessly over him. Yet he cannot remember either to have heard the shell coming or to have thought of flinging himself down. But had he not abandoned himself to the impulse, he would now be a heap of mangled flesh. It is this other, this second sight in us that has thrown us to the ground and saved us without our knowing how. If it were not so, there would not be one man alive from Flanders to the Vosges. Yeah. So he's saying here that, in war, you get an instinct, a second sight, right? And we all get that in the normal everyday things in our lives, right? I mean, you get, it's muscle memory, but this is on a completely different preternatural primordial level, right? And let's see, I wrote, language becomes archaic to reflect the ancient primordial nature of war that takes on a spiritual dimension and significance. That's also why he talks about the whirlpool, right? Which is interesting because he uses like an aquatic metaphor to describe the earth. Skipping forward here, he says, there's the part with the horses. Essentially, Paul's journey is the futility of the war is reflected in the sort of futile back and forth nature of the narrative, because he goes back and forth. He goes back and forth, front to release, right? And eventually what happens, okay, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert for what happens in the book here before I dive back into the analysis. What happens is he goes back to the front after leave, and he's separated by his friends, and he's thrown into a artillery pit, essentially, a crater, and he's lying there, kind of trying to get his bearings, and then somebody falls into this pit, and it's a Frenchman, so it's his enemy, and without thinking, just instinctually, he stabs the guy. He stabs him 3 times, but the guy doesn't die. And he gurgles for like an entire day. And in the process of, he can't get back out of the pit because he tries to put his helmet up, but his helmet's destroyed by machine gun fire. So he can't get out of it. So he ends up confronting this guy, and this guy can't speak, he can't talk, but his eyes are showing the horror of death and of what's just happened to him. And he's afraid that Paul's going to stab him again. And Paul then staunches the wounds, puts a field dressing on them, and then ends up apologizing and saying, I'm so sorry. I know you would have done this to me and I had to do it to you, but essentially I'm sorry that they've put us here to do this to each other. And he tries to comfort the guy. Eventually the guy dies. And then Paul takes out the guy's wallet and like his pictures, and he sees pictures of his wife and daughter. And he promises to himself that no matter what, he's going to give everything he has to the guy's wife. He's going to support him after the war, his family after the war. He's going to write to them. He's going to go see them. And he's being sincere here, because there's a scene where, his buddies will die when he's on leave, and he goes and he has to tell his buddies' parents, like, what happened to their son. And there's an interesting situation where he has to go tell his friend's mom that his son died, and he lies to her. And his mother says, it's not fair. How come you're here walking around and my son isn't? And he says, his response in his head is kind of like, well, people always kind of have these wild reactions, but they just don't understand the war. And then he lies, and because his friend suffered this horrible death, but he tells the mother says, how did he die? And he says, well, he was shot through the heart. He felt nothing. It was nothing. And then the mother makes him swear that that's true, swear on all that's sacred. And he says, of course he swears, because he doesn't believe in anything sacred anymore. There's nothing sacred because look what's happened to him. Right. Um, and, and then what happens is, anyway, his friends save him out of the land, the pit, and he goes on about his business. But then his friend Cat, who is like the Cat is like the Sarge of the book. He's like the lovable, big tough guy who knows all about war, and he's older, but he dies. And Paul carries him as far as he can and back to the lines. And he had just been talking to him, and they say, no, this guy's dead. And he says, no, I was just talking to him. And even with all that he's been through, he cannot come to grips with the fact that Cat is dead, because Cat is like his best friend, is his brother. He says he feels closer to Cat and the other guys, but mainly Cat. He feels closer than a brother could feel to a brother, than a husband could feel to a wife. They understand each other on a level that no human being could possibly understand the other one. And they don't even need to speak. They share a common existence. And his friend is dead. And then he goes on. He's the only one to survive out of all the people that have gone to the war with him, gone to the front with him from basic. He's the only one left. And then he says, like, we're getting closer to the armistice. He makes it through the summer. He keeps seeing death. Then it's October 1918. And the last part of the spoiler alert, the last part of the book is that he makes it. And then the epilogue is a 1-paragraph statement where it says the man was found face down, only weeks away from the armistice, all quiet on the Western Front. He dies. He fucking dies. Excuse my language. It's appropriate that he dies in such in a book that is the ultimate, work on the horror of war and the terror of modernity, right? And what they've done to us, right? What they do to people, how human beings treat each other. Yes. But he dies, man. He gets killed. He gets killed in the war. And it's not even, and they say it's on a peaceful day. Basically, he gets sniped or he gets shot. They don't describe it, but he gets killed. And that's it. And that, Providence plays a part in this, in that he calls it chance. I call it divine providence, where, there's a group of them walking through. They never know what will happen to them. Bullets are flying everywhere. And who knows the design of the bullets? Who knows when it's somebody's time to go? Who knows, but some live and some die. But you expect it, you expect him to live. He's the speaker here. He's the protagonist. He's the speaker. Yeah. What are y'all saying? I got to get on. Why? You said something about war is the watchword. Yeah, I'm sure it is. That's going to be the new. That's going to be the new watchword. Yeah, face down. I didn't watch my buddies die face at Lawn Dock at Hill 364. From the beaches of La Jolla to Leo Carrillo, right? Yes, but he says, let's see. Oh, The Lost Generation, pages 86 and 87. Let's see. They're talking about what they're going to do after the war. And it says, I don't want to do anything, replies Crop. You'll be dead one day, so what does it matter? I don't think we'll ever go back. Well, I think about it, Albert. I say after a white rolling over my back. When I hear the word peacetime, it goes to my head. And if it really came, I think I would do some unimaginable thing, something, that's worth having lain here in the muck for. Whoa, in the muck, synchro. Kristen, face down in the muck. And he just said muck. But I can't even imagine anything. All I know is that this business about professions and studies and salaries and so on, it makes me sick. It is and always was disgusting. I don't see anything at all, Albert. He says, it will go pretty hard with us all, but nobody at home seems to worry about it. 2 years of shells and bombs. A man won't peel that off as easy as a sock. The war has ruined everything. And here's my favorite paragraph in the book. He is right. We are not youth any longer. It's page 87. We're not youth any longer. We don't want to take the world by storm. We are fleeing. We fly from ourselves, from our life. We were 18 and had begun to love life in the world. We had to shoot it to pieces. The first bomb, the first explosion burst in our hearts. We are cut off from activity, from striving, from progress. We believe in such things no longer. We believe in the war. That reminds me of Blood Meridian and the judge, right? And how he's like, he worships war. He says, that's the Gnostic element is what overrides that and guides it. But what he also says there is that like the judge says war is God. But here, think of that, right? We had begun to love life and the world, and we had to shoot it to pieces. How true, right? How true that we live in this beautiful world and we have to destroy everything. Not we, but we live in this beautiful world, and people have to muck it up, right? And kill each other. And the reason that I found this, and I'm not trying to speak like I'm not saying in a pacifist, he's a pacifist, Walter. I'm not saying in a pacifist sense. Okay. I'm saying in the sense of, that, the book was so powerful for me because, this is now, right? I mean, this is essentially now, but on another level. This is now in the information war and the war on ideas and values, which is more insidious because it's not outright. We're in a spiritual war. And who knows when what the eye is not seen, the ear is not heard, right? Who knows when the time comes for all the rest of that stuff, right? But the point is that, and I'm not saying like can't we all just get along way? I'm saying that it suck that part of the, human condition of the fallen, right? Living in a fallen world is that people always have to fuck it up. They have to, that they can't just, we can't just pray, right? They can't just pray or work things out or what have you. But we're at this point, we're at the point we are now. I know I'm getting kind of off track here, so I'll try and get back to the book. But we live in a world now where, you turn on the television or Twitter or whatever, or you're in conversation with, people, and what do they say? They say, oh man, yeah, if you just turn in your GUNS, right? They don't want you to turn in your GUNS for some sort of altruistic reasons where we can get along. They want you to turn in your GUNZ so they can send them to that other place in Eastern Europe where the thing is going on now. In other words, I mean, I literally heard somebody say that on the news the other day. This was like a local city councilman or something who said, come on, turn in all your GUNZ because we're going to take them and we're going to send them all over there to that country over there in the East. Oh, okay. Okay. So they can all go kill each other over there, right? Out of sight, out of mind for something that you know nothing about, right? Shut your fucking mouth, dude, right? Excuse my language. I know this is a family show. It's a family audience. But I'm sick of that, man. And there's nothing we can do about it, right? There's nothing we can do about that. When you're in a conversation with a person in real life and they say something like that, and what do you say? Nah. Sure, man. What am I going to say? It's too much. What am I going to try to explain the entire situation to some dumbass normie? Right? I can't do that. All I know is that, it's not my world, man. It's not my world. Anyway, page 113. Excuse me, folks. I know. I'm sorry. Listen, it's a family audience. It's a family audience. Excuse me. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Please make sure that everybody here has, I'm sure, because y'all are all Everybody here's a bass breathalyzer. Everybody here smash that like. Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing, everybody. I appreciate you. And thank you to everybody that supported me and supported me tonight. Please, if you can, if you want to consider dropping a few of those Dugan coins, right? Or whatever coins that you have or that you're gonna have in the future. If you want to drop a couple of those to help out your boy, I really appreciate it. Y'all, I'm barreling through the books here, right? I mean, I got a big library and I could do all of them. I could reread all of them again and do all of them, but I'm also trying to look for some, you know, something else that I haven't thought of. So keep dropping me suggestions and keep dropping me some bucks so that I can pick up some, copies of some old books from Jeff Bezos, and we can do some older literature. That's why I went back to this, by the way. Somebody said Victorian literature, and I thought, and I'm going to do that. But I wanted to go back to something a little older. So that's why I went to All Quiet on the Western Front. And we'll do some more Victorian literature. We're going to do Wuthering Heights. I've decided we're going to do Wuthering Heights. I almost did The Tempest, but I couldn't find my old copy of The Tempest, which I wanted to read from. So we need to do that because it's about, magic and all that stuff, sorcery, and the esoteric. We're also going to do King Lear, and we're going to do. I want to do that book. What's it called? Snowfall. What's it called? What's the dystopian book about that gave us the word Avatar? I think it's Snowfall. Yeah, mail me some wheat pennies, Kristen. I really appreciate that. Some buffalo nickels and some wheat pennies. Mail me 2 bits. Okay. I think McDee's probably still accepts 2 bits there for some McDee's nugs. So that would be good. Yeah, Rachel says she likes my hair. Hair on there. Thank you. Yeah, well, I got to tame it. So I got to get a little shower in and then you can watch it transform over the course of the stream, I guess. I'm sorry about that, y'all. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate y'all. All right, so page 113. We have become wild beasts. We do not fight. We defend ourselves against annihilation. It is not against men that we fling our bombs. What we do know of men in this moment when death is hunting us down. Now, for the first time in 3 days, we can see his face. Now, for the first time in 3 days, we can oppose him. We feel a mad anger. We no longer do we lie helpless, waiting on the scaffold. We can destroy and kill to save ourselves, and to be revenged. In other words, it says they're overwhelmed by this wave that bears us along, that fills us with ferocity, turns us into thugs, into murderers, into God knows what devils. This wave that multiplies our strength with fear and madness and greed, seeking and fighting for nothing but our deliverance. And their deliverance, in this sense, is the primordial rage of the wave of momentum gathered by comradeship, right? And it's interesting that, the irony is that he expresses in the book that my take from this is that the book is essentially fighting against death. They want to kill death. Now, we all know there's only one way to kill death, right? And only God kills death. But they are fighting to kill death, to stave off death with death in the midst of this hellscape. It says, the brown earth, page 115, the brown earth, the torn, blasted earth with a greasy shine under the sun's rays. The earth is the background of this restless, gloomy world of automatons. Our gasping and the scratching of a quill, our lips are dry, our heads are debauched with stupor. Thus we stagger forward, and into our pierced and shattered souls bores the tortured image of the brown earth with a greasy sun and the convulsed and dead soldiers. I remember that this was the first time when I read this book in 6th grade. This was the first time that I remember that this is where I learned the word automaton. And I loved that word from then on. I used to, when I was in middle school, when I would write, I would use that instead of the word robot. But he mentions it twice on one page. Remember, this is from the 20s. That reminds me of what's the film? Metropolis, right? With the automaton, the satanic automaton that Jay has analyzed. Great analysis. We lost all feeling for one another. We can hardly control ourselves when our glance lights on the form of some other man. We are insensible, dead men who through some trick some dreadful magic are still able to run and to kill, some dreadful magic, right? Some some weird occult sorcery that allows these men to think of themselves as dead and to fight death. Mutability is one of the major themes of this, and it's fitting that the book is a work of German literature because it made me recall the Anglo-Saxon works that we've covered here, the Old English, the Anglo-Saxon works, the Wanderer, the Seafarer, and finally Beowulf, um, because that is essentially a almost a Viking sensibility, or at least it's expressed so in the old Viking language literature, right? Mutability, right? The sense that and the ubi sunt motif. Where are those who have gone before? And the fact that no matter what, that's one of the things about this book is that again, like the dichotomy between youth and adulthood and how his youth is zoomed forward. It's hyper pressurized, and how he will often go on these monologues about how he has just experienced youth and he's essentially still young, but he's more adult than adult. He's more human than human. And no matter what, he can never go back again, right? He can never go back to the time when the soldiers will often sit around and joke about, like, they'll quiz each other about things that they just had in their classroom. Like they'll ask each other trivia and they'll ask questions that are obviously from schoolhouse quizzes and tests. And it's a joke to them because it's something to discuss. And, it's kind of the dudes sitting around being dudes, but it's like, it's also you sense the futility of it within the greater futility of the war, in the sense that he'll say none of that matters anymore. None of the arithmetic matters. None of the science experiments matter. All that matters is staying alive, and all that matters is them, their comradeship, and how they will survive and make it. And he can't imagine going back to a world where they will discuss such things. How could you ever be in this situation and go back to the world? That's one of the things that, say what you will about, the movie American Sniper, right? About Chris Kyle and all that. Speaking of that, I thought that movie was miscast. I mean, I love Bradley Cooper. I think Bradley Cooper, I really love Bradley Cooper. I've talked here about how I thought he was so awesome in A Star is Born, which seems like not a movie that we would talk about, but I actually really like that movie. I thought from the very first second of that movie that Bradley Cooper was astounding. He was amazing. I really liked his performance, but I thought he was miscast in that movie. I thought when I first read the book, I've got a copy of the book up there. When I first read that book, I thought that they should have cast, what's the guy's name? Star-Lord, the guy in the Jurassic Park movies. What's the guy's name, you guys? Is his name also Chris? Not Chris Evans. What's that guy's name? The one in Jurassic Park. Jeff, help me out here. I thought that guy should have been cast as Chris Kyle. But anyway, there's a great scene. Chris Pratt. Thank you. Thank you to my sister. There's a great, I'm getting dementia, you guys. Where am I? What day is it? There's a great scene in that movie where it really typifies what I've said about show, don't tell. And it's the scene where he comes back from like his fourth or fifth deployment, and he's like driving in his car, and then he like stops at a shop or something, and somebody like asks him about the war, and he doesn't say anything. He just kind of like is polite, and then he gets in his car, and he sort of has a flashback, thinks he's being followed or he's back in the war or whatever, and he's like driving real fast. But nothing, there doesn't need to be any exposition. There doesn't need to be any narration for that scene, because what we can gather from it is that all of this is unspoken, and it's a mental process, it's a thought process, and that there is no possible way that I, as a civilian, am going to be able to comprehend on their level what this person has gone through. And I'm not offering that they're better or worse. I'm just saying that it's a different situation, right? And I think that that's truly what comes out of this book, is that And it almost seems again like a postmodern sensibility in that, you're in this war, you're in this like crucible of war. How are you ever supposed to get along anymore? How are you ever? And that's one of the great things of weird things about life is that, well, people do. Um, One of the other ironies in the book is that he talks. There's a scene where he talks about how. Oh yeah, here it is. He says, I turned right to it on page 165. He says, "This is good. I like it, but I cannot go on with the people. My mother is the only one who asks no questions. Not so my father. He wants me to tell him about the front. He is curious in a way that I find stupid and distressing. I no longer have any real contact with him. There is nothing he likes more than just hearing about it. I realize he does not know that a man cannot talk of such things. I would do it willingly, but it is too dangerous for me to put these things into words. I'm afraid. I'm afraid they might then become gigantic and be no longer able to master them. What would become of us if everything that happens out there were quite clear to us?" What an amazing passage. Now, the irony is that he cannot, there's like three different ironies going on here. One is that he cannot verbalize his experience to the uninitiated per se. And yet he is doing exactly that in the text. He's doing exactly that. He is verbalizing his experience to us, right? That's exactly what he's doing. The other irony is that what would become of us if things were to become quite clear to us? If only he could verbalize this experience to the people that are in charge, that plan such things and that throw people like him into it, then the world may be a different place. Of course, we know that that's wishful thinking. That would never happen because these people are psychotic and psychopaths, and that this is exactly what they want. And they will never talk or listen to some peon that they are going to send to the war, right? The other irony is that you notice in the book that he is not afraid. He's never afraid. He's not afraid of combat. He's not afraid of war. He's got training. He's got all this stuff. But there's only two things that he is afraid of. One is verbalizing how he feels about the war and his experiences. It's not doing the actions, it's talking about them. The other is love. There's a scene where the fellas go and they're like swimming in a river. They're on not on leave, but they're away from the front. And they're swimming in a river and they notice these like French girls on the other side of the river, and they're waving to them stuff. And then that night they sneak across the river and they go talk to them. And, they end up, they have relations with them. But he realizes that like, he blatantly says that like, he's afraid. He's afraid because of human contact, because of intimacy and softness, right? And because he's afraid of the other great, I mean, isn't it ironic that love and death are tied in with one another in such a way as he's also talking to these French girls? And what is the word for the big O? The word I'm not going to say here, but the big O in French, le petit mot, the little death. So death and love are tied in with one another. That also reminds me of that scene in Apocalypse Now Redux. Shouts out to Jeff. That scene in Apocalypse Now Redux where they go to the French plantation and the woman seduces Willard. She hands him his opium pipe and she says, "You see, there are two of you, one that loves and one that kills, but he is unified in this one body," right? But the two things are so divergent, one that loves and one that kills. Let's see, moving on from there. Page 192, a statement on how he feels about his comrades, how little we understand one another. He says, "They rarely speak, and then only a few words. They are more human and more brotherly towards one another, it seems to me, than we are." He's talking about this is a scene where he has to guard a Russian prison camp, and he's talking about the Russian prisoners of war. He says, "I see their dark forms, their beards move in the wind. I know nothing of them except that they are prisoners. And that is exactly what troubles me. Their life is obscure and guiltless. If I could know more of them, what their names are, how they live, what they are waiting for, what their burdens are, then my emotion My emotion would have an object and might become sympathy. But as it is, I perceive them behind them only the suffering of the creature, the awful melancholy of life, and the pitilessness of men. A word of command has made these silent figures our enemies. A word of command might transform them into our friends. Right? But who can draw such a distinction when he looks at these quiet men with their childlike faces and apostles' beards? You notice that in the big moments in this book, he uses uses the language of Christianity, right? Saul, Paul, the apostles, the tabernacle. He says any non-commissioned officer is more of an enemy to a recruit, any schoolmaster to a pupil than they are to us. And yet we would shoot at them again and they at us if they were free. I'm frightened. See, here he's frightened again, but he's frightened only by the idea that these are human beings and that he's come to realize that these are just people, man. Each one has a story and a life. Kind of like if they would show on the damn boomer TV on the TV, right? If they would show on the TV or on any platform on the internet, right? If instead of constantly barraging you with, oh no, we need to send GUNZ so we can annihilate these horrible people in the East who have taken over this other place. Instead of that, saying, all right, these are human beings. These are people. There must be a reason for this. Number one, we could stay out of it. Number two, we could listen something, right? Instead of, oh, we just got out of this 20-year war on terror and now we're going to get right back into another one, right? I'm frightened. I dare think this way no more. This way lies the abyss. It is not now the time, but I will not lose these thoughts. I will keep them, shut them away until the war is ended. My heart beats fast. This is the aim, the sole aim that I have thought of in the trenches, that I have looked for as the only possibility of existence. After this annihilation of all human feeling, this is a task that will make life afterward worthy of these hideous years. That's how he will survive, right? He will take this into account. He will live. He will try to change something. He says on page 2, I'm going to read like 2 more passages. On page 263, he says, I'm young, I'm 20 years old, yet I know nothing of life but despair, death, fear, and fatuous superficiality cast over an abyss of sorrow. I see how peoples are set against one another, and in silence, unknowingly, foolishly, obediently, innocently slay one another. I see that the keenest brains of the world invent weapons and words to make it yet more refined and enduring. And all men of my age, here and over there, throughout the whole world, see these things. All my generation is experiencing these things with me. What would our fathers do if we suddenly stood up and came before them and proffered our account? What do they expect of us if a time ever comes when the war is over? Through the years, our business has been killing. It was our first calling in life. Our knowledge of life is limited to death. What will happen afterwards? And what shall come of us? So, in other words, the last, I'm going to read the last 2 paragraphs of the book. This is the epilogue. He fell in October 1918 on a day that was so quiet and still on the whole front that the Army report confined itself to a single sentence: all quiet on the Western Front. Damn, man, that really hits me. That really gets me. He had fallen forward and lay on the earth as though sleeping. Turning him over, one saw that he could not have suffered long. His face had an expression of calm, as though almost glad the end had come. Oh my gosh. Wow. What a book. Every young person should read this book. Thankful that I did, and I'm glad I reread it. Every adult everybody should, who should read this book. Not that it would do anything. Everybody who makes these kinds of decisions should read this book, right? It wouldn't do a damn thing, but everybody should read it. It's one of the great books. So I'm going to close this out with something I read before, which was from Ezra Pound. I covered this in one of the earlier streams. I think it was either in the Wilfred Owen or maybe in the T.S. Eliot on modernity stream, talking about Ezra Pound. This is probably, remember, verse is This is the best words in the best order, right? So there's something to be said for. Sorry, I got to hydrate, y'all. There's something to be said for the long winding prose of All Quiet on the Western Front, which form plus content equals meaning, right? The form of the book is this long and winding um, prose narrative, just like the long and winding, never-ending uh, chasm cuts into the earth of the trenches itself. But it's also written in a simplistic style with a sort of an easy diction and a fluid back and forth between the past and the present tense, which mimics the youthful speaker, the youthful voice in the book. And the meaning, essentially, right? What can we take as our meaning? Of the book, the meaning is that um, the is that war, the never changing notion of war, which is a story, as old as time, continuously um, forces youth into the unfortunate, the unfortunate stance of adulthood, which continuously does one of two things, right? Either makes you reflect and realize that you don't want war anymore, or that war is necessary. And sometimes both are true. Um, but what it certainly does is it creates an impression upon the reader, and a real truthful impression that war is certainly hell. War sucks, but that is the state of the fallen world, right? But you need a deliverance and a redemption beyond fighting against death for death, right? You need true salvation. Now, here, this comes from Ezra Pound's Hugh Selwyn Moberly. Now, this is a verse statement on World War One, and I think that it encapsulates a lot of the book. He says, "These," this is section 4 of Hugh Selwyn Moberly. He says, "These fought in any case, and some believing pro domo in any case. Some quick to arm, some for adventure, some for fear of weakness, some for fear of censure, some for love of slaughter in imagination, learning later, some in fear, learning love of slaughter. Died some pro patria mori, no dulce, non et decor, walked eye deep in hell, believing in old men's lies, then unbelieving, came home to a lie, home to many deceits, home to old lies and new infamy, usury, age old and age thick, and liars in public places. Daring as never before, wastage as never before, young blood and high blood, fair cheeks and fine bodies, fortitude as never before, frankness as never before, disillusions as never told in the old days, hysterias, trench confessions, laughter out of dead bellies. There died a myriad, and of the best among them, for an old bitch gone in the teeth, for a botched civilization, charm smiling at the good mouth, quick eyes gone under earth's lid, for too gross of broken statues, for a few thousand battered books." That's it. That's war. One thing that I didn't mention, just to close this down real quick, you guys, thank you everybody for being here. Make sure, again, please make sure you smash that like. Appreciate you. Please leave a comment for me. Go back and leave a comment. Comment, right? Word. It's just something. Like leave a comment for me, so the algo pick us up. Please share. Talk to your friends. Make sure they subscribe to the channel. Please share me anywhere. Please think about giving a couple of them hard-earned coin, dropping them on one of those three things that the mods, my beautiful mod friends, have dropped throughout. Jethro, Crispy, all my friends, or in the channel description or the video description. Drop me a couple bucks so I can keep doing. I'm going to keep doing it anyway, but drop me a couple bucks to support me. I appreciate you. I'm going to keep doing this. But one last thing I'm going to say is that I remember even in 6th grade reading this and learning that, the Crimean War, right? And the Tennyson and the Charge of the Light Brigade is kind of considered the first modern war, right? But World War I is certainly truly the most. It's the start of the spark of modernity, right? And shows you exactly what he said in this book, which is that the smart people, the good people the world over, spend all their time making weapons of war so that we can learn how to destroy each other more effectively, and smooth it over with words, right, to make it more palatable. Yes, I mean, look at and that's what 1984 does. That's what happens every day now. Any look at how we have to avoid the algo right now with all of our terms. We have to say things to smooth them over, because they are unpalatable, right? And that World War One, we saw this with William Butler Yeats and the gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, and my interpretation of the second coming of Yeats, besides the what I see as the obvious occult references to the new aeon and the his wanting to bring on the age of the Antichrist. But in terms of the some of the practical details of the verbiage of that poem, the gaze at blank and pitiless as the sun, and the idea of the war in the Middle East and the Sphinx and the tank represent, the gaze is the eye of the howitzer or the barrel of the tank, right? And you are looking down the barrel of a gun into the future, right? Or like Orwell, right? Imagine the future, and so boot stamping on a human face forever, right? Or in Sylvia Plath, right? Every woman adores a fascist, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you, right? And now that sounds particularly black-pilled, but when we talk about war and this sort of crucible of human experience, and how the first mechanized war, World War One, all of a sudden, we have horses in the war, but then we go into machine guns, flamethrowers, tanks, and aviation and bombs are all debuted in that war, right? They all come out of World War One. And one of the big things in the book is where he confronts his old schoolmaster who coerced them into joining, they'll say it, decorum est pro patria mori, right? It's good and right to die for one's country, which Wilfred Owen, in his way, and in this poem and in Ezra Pound, they sort of rebut. But the idea, what happened was, and this actually happened, was that entire classes of military institutes and of schools in Europe were annihilated, because when the war broke out, they imagined that it would be like their idea of like the Civil War. They would be these gallant soldiers on horseback with sabers fighting against the foe, right? Or they would be in the Crusades fighting the Saracens. And the reality was they were thrown into the muck and the trenches and the trench foot and the disease and the cholera and the mustard gas and the typhoid of the realities of mechanized war and modern warfare. And I think that's one of the great, tragedies, obviously, of the era that continues today, if you call that a tragedy in a classical sense, I don't know. And also one of the great, lessons that people, if there's a lesson to be learned, that people out there still don't seem to understand or comprehend. And you don't need to be a soldier in combat to understand that lesson. I think that it's important for the civilians and for intellectuals, for people, regular people, good people, to understand that, right? That this is to be put off except under extenuating and special circumstances. So that's about all I got, you guys. What'd you think of that? That was All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque. And I also read, of course, Ezra Pound's an excerpt from Hugh Selwyn Moberly. This is a good little book here. I picked this up in England. This is a Faber copy, and this is a 1935 edition of Ezra Pound, which is pretty cool. I got that for like £5. I got it for £5. I got it for £5, right, at the local bookshop. right? I enjoyed. What do you guys think? I enjoyed Jay's stream earlier tonight with Rachel, not Rachel, our base homeschool mom, different Rachel, on Teal Swan and the Gurus. I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was a really good stream. Um, Shouts out to all of our homies out there, DPH and Primal Edge Health and Tristan. Um, Shouts out to all of them. We're going to keep going. And uh, once we, again, guys, once we get up to this 1,000 subs, we're going to have a big old party. And I've already decided, my sister helped me with this. Our 1,000 stream party is going to be partly, at least, an analysis of Caddyshack. We're going to do a serious analysis of Caddyshack. We're going to do cringe impressions and music. We'll have a call in. We'll certainly have our homeboy Jerry on there. And hopefully, as we keep, talking to our homeboy Wes Lex there, it's time that we level up the stream. And we've done so well so far, and I'm so thankful for everybody. It's time for us to level up and do some big changes. And I've been fortunate to be on some really good streams, like with our homies out there. Hopefully in the future, you guys, hopefully in the future, we'll when the time is right and stuff, we have some, we've gone up a little bit. We can maybe ask JD if he'll be on our stream here. Because that would be totally based. That would be great. A great idea. That would everybody would love it, of course. And what higher IQ content could we get? You know what I'm saying? So I think that's something to aim for. That would be wonderful. And I'm just sharing that with you guys. And then, shouts out to Devin out there who drops $5. Thank you so much. That's for the Caddyshack announcement. Thank you so much. Yes. Hey, you're a nice lady. You're a good lady. Hey, you must have been something before electricity. Eh? Yeah, get Jim Bob. Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah, that would be sweet if we could ask Jim Bob to be on here. Who knows? These are like next level e-celebs, you guys. So who knows? But no, that would be really cool to ask some of our friends, right? Hey, now I know why tigers eat their young. You want to make $14 the hard way? Meet my friend, Mr. Wang. No offense. So yeah, we're gonna do a caddy. Maybe we'll do a Caddyshack. Maybe we'll get some of our friends on and we'll do a reading. We'll do like a table read of Caddyshack. We'll do the Caddyshack script. Right? We'll just do the lines from Caddyshack. That would be pretty cool. I tell you, this place sucks. Sucks. Oh, Danny. I sound much younger than you to the gas chamber. Yeah, so yes, thank you so much, homeboys. Really appreciate you. $14 the hard way. We did. Oh, shouts out. You doing a little Norm joke there. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, of course, I'm going to get the Norm references, right? Yeah. Yeah, he was, I can't say the rest, something punks for $14 a pop under the Queensboro Bridge, right? Yeah, old movie music. Shouts out to you with the Norm references. Yep. Nobody loves Norm McD than your homeboy right here. In fact, you guys, maybe that will be one of the next analyses that we'll do, because I've got Norm Macdonald's book right here, right, which is not a memoir. Maybe we can cover that soon in the future. It's actually great. If you don't have this book, it's a great book. Really well written. Shouts out to Norm McD. Yes, so that's about all I got, you guys. Thank you so much for being here on a what day is this? Thursday night. Hope everybody's having a great summer. And I guess I will see you around the bend. I'm just checking one more time for super chats. Thank you to everybody who super chatted. Thank you for being here for this All Quiet on the Western Front analysis. I don't know what movie I'm going to do, or what book I'm going to do next, but I'm sure it'll be soon. Okay. So thank you to everybody. I appreciate you. I love you. And peace out. I'll see you guys later. Peace.